All right, let's talk about a man named Ignaz Semmelweis. He was a doctor back in the 19th century who made a discovery so important it should have made him a global hero. He figured out how to stop mothers from dying from a mysterious illness, saving an incredible number of lives. But instead of getting parades and awards, he was mocked, ignored, and ultimately, his discovery destroyed him.
It just doesn't make any sense, right? What if you found the cure for something deadly, had all the proof you needed, and instead of being celebrated, you were cast out? That's exactly what happened here. To figure out how this could possibly happen, we've got to go back in time, to Vienna in the 1840s, where a terrifying medical mystery was unfolding.
So, picture this. We're at the Vienna General Hospital. It's one of the biggest, most advanced hospitals in all of Europe at the time. And inside, it has 2 different maternity clinics, right next to each other. But there was a deadly secret hiding in one of them.
Okay, so you've got these 2 clinics. The first clinic was for training doctors and medical students. The second clinic was for training midwives. Now, here's the crucial difference. The doctors and students in Clinic 1 also spent their mornings performing autopsies. The midwives in Clinic 2? They didn't. And the result of this one little difference was a horrifying gap in the death rates from something called childbed fever.
Just take a look at these numbers. This wasn't a one-off bad year. This was a consistent, terrifying pattern. I mean, look at 1842. Almost 16% of mothers in the doctor's clinic died. That is insane. It got so bad that women would literally get on their knees and beg to be admitted to the midwife's clinic because they knew their chances of survival were so much better there. Something had to be done, and a young doctor named Ignaz Semmelweis was about to make it his mission to find an answer. So, Semmelweis dives in. He starts investigating like a detective, ruling out all the usual suspects. Was it the air? No. Was it something about the patients themselves? Nope. He tested everything, and he realized the killer had to be something that was only happening in the first clinic. Now, you have to remember, this was a completely different world, medically speaking. The idea that tiny, invisible germs could make you sick, it sounded like science fiction. Doctors at the time thought diseases were caused by miasma or bad air, or maybe just something wrong inside a person's body. Nobody, and I mean nobody, thought that a doctor's own hands could be deadly. And then came the breakthrough, and it came from a tragedy. One of Semmelweis' friends, a fellow doctor, died after accidentally getting cut by a student's scalpel during an autopsy. And when Semmelweis looked at his friend's symptoms, they were exactly the same as the mother's dying of childbed fever. That was his aha moment. He finally connected the dots between the autopsy room and the maternity ward. He developed a theory. He didn't know about germs, of course, so he called them cadaverous particles, basically tiny invisible pieces of the corpses that doctors were getting on their hands in the autopsy room. And then, without washing, they were carrying that material right over to the maternity ward and transmitting it to the mothers during examinations. It was an absolutely brilliant leap of logic, decades before anyone would prove germs were real. But, a theory is just a theory until you can prove it. And Semmelweis didn't just have an idea. He came up with a simple, powerful experiment that would deliver proof that was absolutely impossible to deny. His solution was almost laughably simple. He just made a new rule. Every doctor and student had to scrub their hands with a solution of chlorinated lime before they could examine a patient. He actually picked that specific chemical because it was the only thing strong enough to get rid of the horrible smell from the autopsy room. He figured if it could destroy the smell, it could destroy the deadly particles too. And the results? They were just staggering. In April of 1847, right before he started the handwashing rule, the death rate in his clinic was a horrifying 18.3%. By July, just a couple months later, it had dropped to 1.2%. The deaths just stopped. It was a miracle. That's a 90% reduction in deaths. Suddenly, the doctor's clinic was even safer than the midwife's clinic. The data couldn't have been clearer. Semmelweis had done it. He'd solved the mystery. He was a hero. Or at least he should have been. And this is where this incredible story of scientific discovery takes a dark turn and becomes a story about human nature. You'd think with proof this obvious, this life-saving, every hospital in Europe would be adopting his methods overnight. But they didn't. In fact, he was met with total resistance. So why would the medical community reject this? Well, there were a few reasons. First, his theory of cadaverous particles didn't fit with any accepted science of the day. Without germ theory, it just sounded made up. Second, the solution, just washing your hands, seemed way too simple. But the biggest reason? It was professional pride. It was a massive insult to suggest that a gentleman doctor could be the cause of death. They just couldn't stomach the idea that they were the problem. His critics even used a fancy logical fallacy to dismiss his data. It's called post hoc ergo propter hoc, which basically means after this, therefore because of this. They argued that, sure, the deaths dropped after he started the hand-washing, but that didn't prove the hand-washing caused it. They said it was probably just a coincidence, completely ignoring the mountain of evidence staring them right in the face. And this wasn't just an academic debate, it got political. His bosses at the hospital, who were annoyed by his constant pushing and deeply insulted by his theory, simply decided not to renew his contract. The man who had single-handedly solved their biggest crisis and saved so many lives was just kicked out. Semmelweis eventually went back to Hungary, where he spent the rest of his days pretty much fighting a losing battle. He wrote these angry, desperate letters to famous doctors all over Europe, begging them to just wash their hands. His tragic end is actually what gives us this really powerful idea that we still talk about today. In the most gut-wrenching, ironic twist, Semmelweis died in 1865 in a mental institution from sepsis, blood poisoning, the exact same kind of infection that he had dedicated his life to preventing. And it was only after he was dead that scientists like Louis Pasteur and Joseph Lister came along and proved that, yep, germs are real and they cause disease. They finally gave him the scientific proof he'd been missing and vindicated him completely. But it was far, far too late. And because of his story, we now have a name for this phenomenon, the Semmelweis reflex. It's that knee-jerk, automatic reaction to reject new evidence simply because it goes against what we've always believed. It's when we protect our old ideas over a new truth, even when lives are at stake. You know, the story of Ignaz Semmelweis is so much more than just a history lesson. It's a warning. It forces you to stop and ask a pretty uncomfortable question. What simple, life-saving truths might we be ignoring right now just because they feel too strange or too simple, or because they challenge our own comfortable beliefs?